Day 5. That's when things started getting real. But let's back up a second. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into an absolutely wild psychological experiment. We're talking about two complete strangers locked in a glaringly white room for 100 days. It is the ultimate test of human endurance, and honestly, the way it all unfolds is just captivating.
Seriously, ask yourself, could you do it? Imagine zero sunlight, no clocks, no concept of time whatsoever. Your only company? A complete stranger named Bailey or Susie. When they first took off their blindfolds inside this cube, that was literally the first time they laid eyes on each other. And they were stepping into an environment completely devoid of a natural rhythm. I mean, they actually started their second day at 2:37 in the morning, just because they totally misjudged their sleep schedule.
So, what on earth kept them from just opening the door and walking out? Well, there was a massive incentive. $500,000 sitting right there in a vault in front of them. It was physically divided up. 250 grand on his side, 250 grand on hers. Just this constant glowing reminder of the literal fortune at stake if they could just endure 100 sleeps.
Moving into the 100-day void, let's look at the setup to understand the foundation of this whole crazy experiment.
The rules were simple, but man, were they brutal. Physically, they had what they needed to survive. Basic beds, a private bathroom, and enough canned chicken and beef to last the whole time. But here's the absolute genius of this design. It forced immediate cooperation. Think about it. Their financial destiny depended entirely on a total stranger's willpower. If either one of them decided they'd had enough and crossed a red line on the floor to quit, boom, both of them walk away with absolutely nothing, $0.
Now, the early days show us this incredible psychological arc. On day 4, they stopped just reacting and started trying to take control, focusing on small actions like making a deck of cards out of journal paper. Then, day 5 hit, and things started getting real. They finally gained some actual momentum. They found a way to ground themselves by actually tricking the camera crew into signing a sheet of paper just so they could figure out the date. They were focused, they were disciplined. But then, day 6 and 7 rolled around, and that's where everything just slowed down. The initial motivation vanished. Progress ground to a halt. Bailey started literally throwing pieces of pork at the wall just to feel something. They were questioning everything. And honestly, this right here, this is the exact phase where most people would just quit.
And compounding all that mental friction was the brutal physical environment. Susie pointed out that the physical toll, especially the fact that they couldn't turn off those blazing, harsh white lights, was pushing them right to the edge. They literally had to hide in the bathroom just to find a scrap of darkness or build these makeshift shields to protect their stinging eyes. Imagine never getting a break from that glare.
Which brings us to the cost of sanity. This is where we see how extreme isolation completely warps your understanding of money and value.
Things that you and I take completely for granted on the outside suddenly had a massive price tag on the inside. A simple light switch to turn off those blinding lights, the producers offered it to them for $50,000. 50 grand. A basic coffee maker? 10,000. These super mundane items suddenly transformed into priceless tools for sanity, and it tested their financial resolve every single day.
This really shows how their initial strict discipline slowly started to erode. Every 10 days, they were hit with a new temptation. On day 20, they held strong. They rejected the smart beds and the light switch, saving 50 grand. Awesome, right? But by day 30, the sheer boredom broke them down and they bought coffee and Harry Potter books for 20 grand. Now on day 40, they got clever and outsmarted the game, using a knife to hack a free TV antenna instead of paying 10 grand per movie. But then day 50 arrived, and human connection just became too valuable. They happily coughed up $20,000 just for a 10-minute visit with their families through the glass. It just goes to show, success in a challenge like this isn't one big heroic moment. It's the small, grueling decisions repeated every single day.
But let's look at the turning point. Day 60 is where their carefully calculated survival strategy took a really devastating hit.
They were presented with this massive locked mystery box and told it would cost them $50,000 of their prize money to keep whatever was inside. They agonized over this for a solid hour. They debated, second-guessed themselves, and finally, they rejected it. They were just too terrified of blowing their hard-earned cash on something completely useless. But here is the brutal twist.
The box actually contained their $50,000 back in cash, plus the keys to 2 completely free Teslas. Are you kidding me? It was a massive gamble that they barely missed, and Susie was just crushed. She felt physically sick, she couldn't sleep, and she tried to cope by jokingly defending her old Prius. But, that humor faded really fast. The bitter regret of saying no just hung over that room like a dark cloud for days.
And that brings us to the ultimate blind gamble. That deep regret completely changed their mindset, leading straight into the massive Day 70 auction.
Absolutely terrified of missing out on another Tesla-level prize, they were brought into a room filled with literally everything they had previously rejected. We're talking $30,000 smart beds, a new mystery box, a private chef, spices, every movie from the Walmart aisle, the whole shebang. But the catch was so incredibly savage, it was a blind bid. If they bid even one single penny below a secret asking price that was hidden behind a curtain, they'd get nothing.
They looked at each other and basically decided, no way are we letting this slip through our fingers again. So they put in an incredibly specific bid, $100,101. And the secret price? It was just $69,000. So yeah, they vastly overpaid, by more than 30 grand. But honestly, they didn't even care. They got the comfortable beds, the amazing food, and, get this, another set of Teslas hidden inside the new mystery box. They essentially transformed their miserable white cube into a weird little temporary vacation.
So let's break down the final math here. Even after all of those extravagant survival purchases, the coffee, the books, the family visit, and that massive 100 grand auction splurge, they still had an absolutely life-changing $359,899 on the line as they limped toward the finish.
But as we all know, just having stuff doesn't magically fix the core issue of being isolated with someone. The hot water tank was tiny, which meant Susie was taking cold showers for months. Meanwhile, Bailey had this chaotic, nonstop 3 a.m. energy that was driving Susie completely up the wall. It got so bad, she literally hid the Monopoly dice just so she wouldn't have to play games with him anymore. Their clashing energies almost tore their entire alliance apart right at the finish line.
And that leads us to the final trust test on day 100. This is where the true genius of the whole experiment reveals itself. It wasn't just a test of endurance, it was a ruthless test of human nature. On that very last day, they were forced right back into total isolation. They had to put on blindfolds and noise-canceling headphones, completely cut off, in absolute silence, totally unable to communicate with each other. They had to secretly press a button. They could either choose to split the remaining money or steal the other person's share. This final hurdle was built on the terrifying logic of the classic prisoner's dilemma. If they both hit split, they share the wealth. But if one hits steal while the other splits, the betrayer takes the whole pot. And here is the most agonizing part. If mutual greed takes over and they both decide to steal, they both walk away with nothing. Imagine that. 100 days of literal torture for $0? In those final, agonizing seconds, Bailey even admitted how unbelievably tempting it was to just take the whole 360 grand for himself. But ultimately, they both had to weigh the value of cold, hard cash against the mutual respect they'd forged in the crucible of that tiny white room. They had to realize that surviving those intensely dark times together carried a weight that went way beyond money.
And this is just such a beautiful illustration of the power of shared struggle. Because against all that mounting psychological pressure, all the petty roommate annoyances, and the massive looming temptation of betrayal, they both hit split. The room lit up green. It validated 100 days of shared survival, and they finally secured their well-deserved prize.
What an incredible conclusion to an absolutely intense explainer. It really leaves you wondering, doesn't it? If you were the one sitting in that chair, completely isolated, staring down at that button after 100 days of sheer madness, what would your true nature reveal? Would you split the money, or would you steal it all?